Hi, Leslie. Welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you for having me, Ken. Great to be here.
It is so good to meet you. And I know you have a brand new book out called The Power of Instinct, and I want to hear all about it. But I want to hear about you first. So, can you tell us a little bit? I know you've been like a lifelong marketer, but we're just meeting today for the first time, and I'm sure for a lot of our audience as well. So, maybe give us your bio if you could.
Sure, I'd love to. So I started out in marketing right after business school. I was fortunate enough to go to Harvard Business School, and I came out into the business world thinking that I was going to learn a lot and see all these great companies growing. And what I quickly found out working at places like P&G and Johnson and Johnson is that a lot of the businesses were suffering and they weren't growing as well as they needed to. And so I had like very different ideas from everybody else. I was questioning things. Why aren't we growing? Because I thought here I am at P&G, I'm going to learn everything there is to know about
Right,
marketing and how to make it work. And then I quickly found out that, nobody knows.
right.
Nobody really knows how to consistently drive business. I learned that we know actually very little about the human mind. This was way back when, 30 years ago. And so I had different ideas. I thought we were over promoting and over couponing and over discounting and basically buying sales instead of actually creating instinctive brand preference. And so all these ideas were very different and they didn't go over very well back then, to
So,
be
yeah,
honest.
new
Um,
graduate, probably a more male-dominated world, I'm thinking, right? So everyone wants to hear the new 25-year-old in 1990, whatever, tell you about what you're doing wrong in your marketing department, right?
Young, blonde, female, and argumentative, like
Right.
not a combination.
How long did you stay in corporate before you decided to do something different?
I stayed about 10 years.
Okay.
Um, I realized that I had these ideas about how to basically change people's minds that were the opposite of what was being taught in the corporate world at that time. And I needed to leave the corporate world in order to come back to service those very same companies. So I started my company, Triggers Brand Consulting, in 1995. It was the first consulting firm rooted in behavioral science at a time when behavioral science wasn't really even a thing back then. And I started my firm with the intent of basically finding a process that would drive consistent brand growth every single time, not just because, your ad agency creative person has a great idea in the shower. Like I
Yeah.
want to basically institutionalize growth, as opposed to making it a random hit or miss event based on advertising. And we did just that. We cracked the code on how to drive consistent brand growth. We created a repeatable process. We've now done it in over 75 different categories. All of the biggest brands in the world. We've been blessed to work with, the best and the brightest, top, household names like McDonald's and PepsiCo and Mondelez and Kraft Heinz, and like we're just really, really lucky. Um, but it's because we have figured something out that other people haven't been able to do,
Did you
which
feel like, sorry not to interrupt, but did you feel, because it's one thing to go out on your own and leave the security of kind of the corporate blanket. It's another to take a concept that hasn't really been tested yet, right? It's why it's a concept. And you kind of went all in on it, right? It seemed like you had a high degree of certainty, right? That this is what the market needed.
I did, and I guess that probably comes a little bit from my parents,
Yeah.
who always told me to question authority. I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and one of the things that you learn about Holocaust survivors is that they have this just level of persistence and this feeling that not everybody knows everything, and that the authorities may be wrong. They may actually be really wrong.
Right.
And you have to always challenge that authority and not be afraid to ask questions or to stick to your guns, and to just be persistent. And so I think that somehow got into my DNA. And I really felt that we needed to get to what drives people's instinctive choices. I thought that we were working at a very superficial level. We were asking people what they think in focus groups, and I didn't think that people even know why they buy the brands that they do. Like, why are we trusting what people say? Maybe they don't even know. And the more I studied, over the 30 years of having my company, the more we realized that people actually don't know why they buy the brands that they do, because the decision lives in their subconscious mind. It lives in their unconscious memories. They're driven to buy the brands they do purely by instinct. And I don't mean instinct, the gut. I mean instinct, the brain, because brands live in people's memories. And we can talk about this as we go on. But the brain is really incredibly fascinating. And when you start to understand what actually makes us tick, you realize that we have to go through a completely different pathway than we thought. We've been trying to persuade people for years to do what we want them to do as marketers, and that's actually the opposite of what works. All this persuasion, all this barraging people with messages actually pushes people away. So there's like a whole new approach that we need to adopt as marketers if we want to be effective.
Where did you get the premise for the book? Like, where did that come from? Was that just a culmination of the work that you've been doing over the last, I guess 2.5, 3 decades now?
Yeah, exactly. So the name of the book is The Power of Instinct, and the traditional approach to marketing is to try to persuade the conscious mind to do what it doesn't want to do. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work very well. Growth is very hard. And that is because we're going up against a brick wall. The conscious mind is resistant to change. It's skeptical. So the idea behind the power of instinct is that if we can harness the instinctive mind via cognitive shortcuts and pushing different levers, we can actually bypass that conscious mind altogether and tap the instinctive mind in order to scale businesses and brands faster. That's basically the concept. Because you can basically think about the mind as an iceberg, with the conscious mind above the waterline and the unconscious mind below the waterline. And the entire marketing world has been focused on above the waterline, that conscious mind, and it doesn't work for two reasons. One is the conscious mind is very resistant to change. It's skeptical. It sees you coming. It's conscious. It says, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to sell me. And the other reason it doesn't work is that only 5% of the decisions that we make are made by the conscious mind anyway. So we're spending basically 100% of our time and energy on only 5% of people's decisions. What we do in our business is we redirect companies to focus on the instinctive mind, where decisions are actually made and where there's a different toolkit of levers that you can use to make change, to change perceptions, to change behavior much faster. And that's the entire premise of the book. I saw the marketing world practicing this traditional way of marketing. Think about it this way. The rule book of marketing, what we've all been trained on for the past 50 years, things like uniqueness, things about listening to your core customers, all of those were developed at a time when we thought it was the conscious mind making our decisions. But now we know that it's not the conscious mind, that it's the instinctive mind that makes decisions. And so I developed like a new playbook, a new rule book for marketers, which basically is a series of 10 rules that displace the old rules. And the new rules are actually made for the conscious mind. They recognize the unconscious mind. They recognize that it is the instinctive mind that's calling the shots, and that we need a new playbook so that marketers can be empowered to know how to reach that hidden brain.
As a company owner, was it hard to sell that concept when you first got started? Because you're dealing with, like you said, McDonald's and probably General Motors and like whatever else. And that's totally foreign to them. They're like, what about the 2-for-1 coupon or the Black Friday deal or whatever? And you're going, no, you got to like win their hearts before you win their minds, right? So, how was that?
That was really difficult.
Yeah.
So I would say the first 20 years of even having my company. So let alone what it was like to be inside, any of these companies, everybody was still practicing traditional marketing. Behavioral science wasn't even a term that people talked about. Neuroscience, not at all. And so it was, I'd say the first 20 years of my having my company, I was pushing a rock uphill, in a big way. But I always believed that I was really onto something. And the projects that we did do, and they would tend to be like these Renaissance thinkers
Hmm.
at companies, people who were really future oriented, who really understood that what they were doing now wasn't working very well. And so they looked at this as very innovative. And so there were a few people who came on very early, and those were our clients, and we would get these results. And our clients would be like, "Oh my God, this is crazy. You were able to, double growth when, we haven't been able to move this business in 20 years." And so we started to see those results when we would put this theory into action. Then we just kept refining it and refining it better and better. And then finally, in the past 5 to 10 years, really mainly in the last 5 years, the idea of the instinctive mind has gone mainstream.
And do you
Fine.
have competition in that space? I mean, I'm assuming you do, right? Because I mean, it would be a hard thing to sort of copyright, right? Like, but it's a way of doing things, not a. So, are there other people doing what you do now, and or are you guys pretty unique to that?
There really isn't anybody that does exactly what we do.
Okay,
Um, there isn't anybody that is both identifying the implicit barriers and drivers of growth for a business and then also developing solutions, that sort of hit the right levers to rapidly change instinctive brand preference. We have not come across anybody who does exactly that. There are people around sort of the fringes of that can kind of talk a good game, but a lot of it is theoretical. And we're the only ones, this I can say with confidence, that have 30 years of
sure.
practice of working at the instinctive level to change behavior and get whole populations to move from one brand to another. That's what we've been able to achieve. And it's been exciting to see in the last few years this idea catch on, and this idea of the instinctive mind going mainstream. And I think that's a result of a few things. First of all, there is a training program now in marketing departments called How Brands Grow. It's the theory, not the practical application, but it's been a really good primer for us to kind of come into a company because they're already starting to talk that language, our
Right.
language. The difference between that organization and ours is that they don't work at the brand level like we do to actually change brand preference for our clients' brands. They're very synergistic in terms of how we work, and how we think. Another thing that's happened is the whole rise of AI. So when you think about AI, what the reason that we have ChatGPT now is that um, the scientists realize that the brain is not a sequential machine, that the brain is actually analogic, which means it connects the dots. It makes analogies all the time. If I say, snow-capped mountain, you say pure, pristine, cold, eco-friendly, like you, but that's how we operate on associations. And so the recognition about how AI works is fueling a little bit the business world, understanding that the human brain is a connecting machine, and that object behind me, the brand Connectome, is just that. It's the series of connections that a brain makes about your brand. So it works exactly the same way as AI works, only this is the real thing. This is the AI is the replica of how the brain works. But what we're reaching in and understanding is how the brand exists in the unconscious mind in people's memories and how it makes these different connections that are either going to help you or hurt you. If the brain makes the wrong connections and actually has negative associations about your brand, that's going to keep people from buying your brand.
So who's this for then? I mean, is it for all like companies? Is it all, for all business people? Because you've worked primarily with big brands, but you got to start somewhere, right? And I imagine that the brand identity starts right away.
100%. So I talk about this as being relevant to literally any company, anywhere, any size, and it is also relevant for personal brands, and for your own brand in the workplace and what people think about you. So it's about, and it actually works for countries, and it works for presidential candidates.
Sure.
Obviously, a hot topic right now. So, really, I think if people read my book, what people have told me after reading my book, because I shouldn't be the one to say, that it's really changed their worldview because now they have a construct to understand how everything works, why people choose this over that, and particularly in the atmosphere that we're in right now, where we have a very polarized society. Politically, the book, if you read it, there's a section in there on politics as well. That's very, very neutral. It's very scientific. It just basically explains why people go one way versus another, and it all has to do with their connectome.
Part of, and tell me if I'm got this right, but when you were talking about, kind of the subconscious versus the conscious mind and the way that we receive information, and it's almost like to me, the conscious mind, if you're advertising to it, I'm not saying in an effective way, but like the ineffective way would be 2 for 1, Black Friday, 20% off. You left an item in your cart, all that, like kind of really aggressive, let's use some kind of leverage, pricing wise, whatever, to get this person to turn the corner. And if I'm hearing you right, just so I understand it, so the audience understands it, is the subconscious is more of a probably gradual, it doesn't have to be gradual, I guess, but a building over time of how people subconsciously perceive your brand and connect or don't connect with your brand, right? So every now and then, that's why I was asking you if you guys were like the only game in town, is because I have noticed, and maybe it's coming from you guys, but in the last like 5 to 10 years, probably, I've seen ads that were really well done and like, and I'm making one up right now, but let's say it's like Delta Airlines. And instead of talking about like low fares nationwide, it's like a business person on the road for a long time getting home because like Delta brought them home, but the whole thing is like a short movie when you're watching it, kind of, right? It's like really well done. They don't talk about airfares, they don't talk about pricing, but they left an impression that is, am I on the right track? Is that the type of subconscious versus conscious advertising?
So let's take that apart a little bit.
Yeah.
The reason that the 2 for 1s, coupons, et cetera, is not something that we recommend getting hooked on is that it's going to work. It actually will work. It will get you some growth, but that growth is going to be fleeting,
Right.
right? Because you basically bought them, bought the customer. You haven't developed that connection at the instinctive level. So I'm not saying there's no role for that. There is, but it's not a long-term strategy.
Right.
What we're talking about is creating more connections in people's minds. So I can't speak about, the effectiveness of the particular commercial that you're talking about. We're not even an ad agency. Our strategies inform an ad agency, and then we test the advertising on and so to learn whether the advertising is creating the right associations. What I want to make clear about is that we're not talking about emotion. So very often when I speak, people say, "Oh, you're talking about throwing out all the functional things and just focusing on emotional messaging." And actually, that's not the case. Emotional messaging does not drive choice. What we want to think about is the creating very sticky assets in people's memories that actually that seep into people's memories, because that's what creates a large brand connectome. And we should probably define brand connectome.
Please, yeah.
So a brand connectome is, well, let's take a step back. The human connectome is the vast map of wires, essentially, the wiring map that is how the brain communicates with itself. So you can almost think of it like a city's traffic system. So one region can speak to the other. That's how the brain works. And the human connectome is being studied by universities and scientists around the world. They're mapping the connectome to understand how do we get rid of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease and all the many different diseases of the human brain. So what we learned at Triggers is that you could kind of pull out a little section of that large human connectome and study a brand connectome within it. And you could not only understand a brand connectome, you could understand the competitors' connectomes in a category. So now you're suddenly giving clients this vast landscape of research and access to people's subconscious minds that they've never had before. You're literally looking at what their brand looks like in the unconscious mind of their customers and the people they don't have, the people they're trying to get, because you're looking at the competitive connectomes as well. And you're looking at your brand in the growth target, the people you're trying to get. The contrast between the people you have and the people you don't, between those two neural maps, that is really what tells you what's going on and what you're missing in the minds of the growth target, why they're not buying you. And you also discover negative associations that are holding them back. Negative associations are really a problem for brands. Business leaders, when a business starts going down, they think that what's going on is that it's because of the economy, the economy, a recession, a fierce competitor, maybe a digital disruptor took some share. So they have all these external factors that they blame essentially for a slowdown in growth. But that's never the true culprit. I mean, those things may in fact be true and they may be factors, but they're not the most important factor, because there's always a competitor that's growing double digits, even in a category that's declining or in a bad economy. What we find is that there are negative associations that have infiltrated the brand connectome of our clients' brands in the minds of the growth target. And that is not often seen because
Right.
nobody's monitoring the unconscious mind. So
Right.
suddenly the business falls out of bed and the business leader's like, "Oh my God, what just happened? This came out of nowhere." Well, had they been monitoring the unconscious mind of their growth target, they would have seen that coming. So you can almost think about the brand connectome as an early warning system. And it's really, really important to monitor the unconscious mind of your growth target, because that enables you to get ahead of things and know where your business is going to be tomorrow, not just today.
So how do you get to that? Like if I was a client for you and I'm like, I think we're missing something here. I like let's say I'm sold on the idea. I'm like, okay, let's run with this, Leslie. What, how do you get that information? If it's a large company, well, I don't want to say McDonald's because they're a client, but any big company,
Yeah.
how do you kind of get that information and cross triangulate it and say, because again, if you survey people, they're going to go, well, Samsung had a bigger
I don't
screen on their
like this
phone or
brand. I
yeah,
don't like that. I like
yeah,
this brand. I don't like that brand. Right.
yeah,
So we avoid all of that
yeah.
because we're working in the realm of memories. That is what this whole thing is about. We use a technique called memory elicitation. And memory elicitation cuts through the likes, the dislikes, the attributes, all the surface things, and it gets to the true drivers of choice, which are implicit barriers and implicit drivers. Those are the things under the surface that most people aren't monitoring, and it lives in people's memories. And if I told you exactly how we do it, I would
Yeah, I get
have
it.
to kill you.
I get it. No problem. Um,
But
that's
just back to the whole emotional connection thing, because I really want to explain this. Because it really bothers me when people think what I'm talking about is emotional advertising or emotional positioning. It has nothing to do with that. Emotion goes in one ear and out the other. It's not sticky. And so all of this advertising that people are doing to make us laugh, to make us cry, it just doesn't have the impact on business results. What we want to do is create very sticky assets, like distinctive brand assets and cognitive shortcuts like triggers, which we can define in a moment. Those do go into memory structure. And what they do is they make the brand connectome larger. So let's talk about what makes a healthy brand connectome. You need to have three things. It needs to be large. So you need a large physical footprint in people's brains. Think of this like a game of Monopoly. Whoever owns the most physical terrain in the brain wins. Um, and so that's one. We want a large physical connectome. It actually has physicality, the brand. It's not just this wispy concept. It actually lives physically in people's minds. Two, we need to have a higher ratio of positive to negative associations because negative associations hold back growth. And three, we need distinctiveness or clarity. We want our brand connectome to be somewhat different from the competitors, but it doesn't need to be like from Mars. It just needs to be distinctive. It doesn't need to be unique. And we can, again, talk about that later because that's another big myth that uniqueness drives business results. It doesn't. So if those are the three things, large, positive, and distinctive. Those are the three things that make a healthy brand connectome. Large, that a large amount of connections, many of those branches, you can think about it conceptually, that creates this large physical footprint where the brand becomes the instinctive go-to choice because it's just occupying more of your brain, more of your brain's terrain. So it's salient in the mind. It has a lot of presence. Then it becomes the instinctive go-to choice. Negative associations hold back growth because they're almost like dead leaves on a tree. If you don't prune the dead leaves right away, the brand starts dying, and the growth goes down. So what we want to do is always keep adding positive associations. We want to get rid of the negative associations right away, and then we want to be distinctive by putting a creative twist on the familiar versus creating something that's completely foreign to people. Because the brain is hardwired to connect with the familiar, not with the
right.
unique.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking, at least in my brain, Apple's done a tremendous job with this. Yes.
Oh, for sure.
I
They're
mean,
they're a pro.
the large physical map, the higher positive. I mean, to me, if they just make something right now, I'll kind of buy it sight unseen. Do you know what I mean? Outside the goggles, I'm not buying those. But if there's a new iPad, I'll buy it. If there's a new iPhone, I'll buy. In fact, I just set myself up to, just renew whenever something comes out because they do kind of live in my head, and I justify it as it makes my business and personal life better. And the only negatives, and they're not even big negatives because I think they've kind of held their pricing in check through COVID. But it used to be like they were way more expensive than everybody else, but I think they're kind of starting to level out a little bit. You know what I mean? So like you said, if I had to write it down, and I know it's in my subconscious anyway, but even trying to bring it up, I'm like, there's so many more W's on the board than L's for them.
100%. And if you think about all the different connections that Apple has in your mind, it's everything from the design aesthetic of the products to the perception of superiority. You've got Steve Jobs in your head. You've got, the black turtlenecks. You've got the movies that you've seen about the company. You've got your friends who are Apple users. This is what is in the connectome. So people think that branding is about your product or your logo, and it's just so much more than that. It's all the far-reaching connections that you've made in your brain about this brand. A brand is known by the associations it keeps.
Right.
That is what is going on here. So yes, the reason that you keep buying repetitively Apple is because you have instinctive brand preference for Apple over Samsung. And your brand connectome is very large and positive. It has all these positive connections in it, and it's more salient in your mind. So it's always going to be your instinctive go-to. And you have almost like a case of perceived superiority. It doesn't even matter if the products are actually superior anymore. You have perceived superiority about Apple. And that's a beautiful thing. And that only comes from a brand doing all the right things in terms of the brand connectome. It almost acts like a buffer of goodness around the brand. Because we have some clients who have parity products, but they have perceived superiority. And then we have brands that clients who have actually superior products, but they don't get credit for it out in the marketplace. So they have parity perceptions. And so, really, the most important thing is perceived superiority.
Right.
And that comes from doing all the right things in terms of managing your brand, adding all those positive associations, making the right connections, and being connected to people's lives in many, many positive ways, not just one.
But then to keep it, you're right. I'd go buy it whether it was the newest, hottest, whatever technology out there. But if they abused that, then the negativity would start to build, right? So if they stopped innovating, because they've even in the last few years been pretty clear to say that even with AI right now, we're not going to be the first to market. We'll let everybody else throw out their widgets and their weird stuff, and we're going to make it so it's AI for the rest of us, right? I think is what they're calling it now, right? And now they're going to bring AI to the phones, and we're okay with that because it's sort of like we trust Apple, and it's like, oh, they're gonna scrub it down into like usable format for me, and we trust that. Um, but yeah, if they fell behind in that, then I would think the negativity would come back, right? And all of a sudden, if there's too much negative, then the brand could start tilting the other way. But because of all the goodwill they built, they've got some leeway. Yeah,
100%. They've got, a couple of decades now of all kinds of positive associations in our minds. But if their product started to fail, or if there were, multiple stories that came out about, maybe some of their leadership doing the wrong things in the workplace,
sure.
or mistreating their employees, some of that might start to tarnish their brand. But for the most part, they've kept their brand healthy and growing, and they keep adding positive associations. Because think about it this way, in order to have market share or in order to increase market share, you first have to have mind share. Those two concepts are completely correlated. You can't increase your market share effectively without increasing your mind share. And to increase your mind share, you need to have a constantly growing brand connectome that you keep healthy by keeping on adding new branches and leaves. I liken this in the book. I use the example of Taylor Swift, who's a celebrity brand, right? And probably the most successful, one of the most successful celebrity brands since the Beatles. And what she does is she keeps introducing her audience to new types of music. So she's like infinitely expanding her connectome, not just one type of music, but then pop and then folk. And then like she just tries everything. And then she reintroduces her older music to new generations of people. So there's just none of the leaves start dying because she's always reinforcing them. It's like studying. If
Right.
you keep learning something over and over again, then it becomes stronger in your mind. And so she's constantly expanding her connectome in terms of her music and then even her relationships, because if you think about the classic celebrity fan relationship, it's very distant. But she's created a fan base that feels like they're her friend, and that she's their friend. I mean, some people even call her mother. So she has like multiple types of relationships too, not just the classic celebrity fan relationship. And all of this is contributing to this ever expanding connectome that I just don't see it stopping, because I think she's doing all the right things. And I think we can expect for her to continue to have this success and have billion-dollar tours in the
Sure.
coming years again. But that's a real lesson for any brand. We need to have multiple positive connections in people's minds. And we need to keep telling people, new generations of people, about the brand from the past, about the heritage of the brand, and not let that kind of become distant or atrophy. So it's all about keeping that brand, keep reinforcing, keeping adding new positive associations, so that the brand keeps thriving, because a brand that isn't growing is dying.
I know you're that's super interesting. And I know you got a chapter in the book, and I don't want to get political, but I'm interested in this how this plays in politics because in my head for any politician, right? Doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican. There's rarely a Apple-ish kind of love for a product. Maybe from some individuals there would be, but in terms of percentage of the public that's aware of the brand, right? I would say most politicians have more negative than positive. But for them, I got to think it's more about quantity than quality in a way, right? Like that you still need those people who are attracted to you as a brand that have more positive than negative, in your universe, but that it's also just about brand recognition. Is that
Yeah.
right?
No, that's exactly right. So let's start with the fact that you need a large connectome
Right.
to win the presidency of the United States. People have to have heard of you. You have to have salience.
Right.
And it becomes really easy to understand why President Biden and former President Trump became the de facto candidates in this past election, because they had the largest brand connectome. And even though there might be negative associations with each of them, probably plenty. And maybe there were candidates who would be better. Size really matters in politics, and really in brand choice in general, because you can't be purchased if you're not known.
Right.
And so they had, both of those individuals had 40, 50 years to build up their connectomes. Then you have somebody brand new, like a Pete Buttigieg or some of the candidates on the other side coming out, and they're brand new, relatively brand new. They're going to have a hard time creating a brand connectome that's as large. So to your point, of the three things we talked about, a healthy brand connectome, salience is really number one.
Sure.
Even if you have some negative associations, you can still do pretty well, just because you've got that large physical footprint in people's brains. Now, if you've got too many negative associations, that could tip you over, that could tip you over the edge and could keep people from voting for you. And we'll have to see where this all nets out. But it's really quite fascinating. Somebody once showed me an article that said that Republicans and Democrats had a different size brain. And I said, that's literally the most ridiculous thing that I've ever heard, because I know how this works. There's a brand connectome that has been nurtured and built up through the cumulative memories. That's what a brand connectome is, the cumulative memories that gets connected to a brand over time in your mind, and very often going back to childhood. So if it's Pepsi or McDonald's, that brand connectome's going back to childhood. And the same thing is true of Republican and Democrat. You're influenced by what you grew up with and in your home, who your friends were, where you went to college. All of these things build up associations. And so each of us has a Republican and a Democrat connectome in our minds. And if you're a Republican, you have more positive associations and few negative associations on your Republican brand connectome. And your Democrat connectome has more negative associations and fewer positive ones. And if you're a Democrat, you have the flip of those two things, right? So if you want to know why it is that Republicans and Democrats can't get along these days, it's because they literally have mirror image connectomes to one another, and they kind of repel like magnets, like the ends of a magnet. And that's why when you criticize somebody's politics, they actually feel pain. They feel the same part of the brain lights up that feels pain, which is crazy to think, but that's how we operate as humans.
But wouldn't it
So
make sense from a marketing perspective in politics to go, let's say both sides have roughly 47% with 6% undecided, right? So any movement of pulling someone from the Democratic to Republican or vice versa could win an election. It would seem that you would want to get a few converters over, but it seems that in politics, everybody doubles down on the original message, maybe in fear of losing the existing fan base.
yeah, I mean, I think that the candidate that pivots to the middle
Right,
during the general election is the one that is going to
right.
win. Because to your point, the people who are all the way on the right and all the way on the left,
They're not moving.
they're not moving.
Right.
It's only really, well, that's why all the candidates spend so much time in the swing states,
Sure.
because that is the movable middle that we can actually influence. And so that is really the recipe for success is to concentrate on those swing states, on those swing voters who can be moved, to your point, and they exist out there. But you really want to make sure that your message is a message that the middle can listen to. And to your point, not doubling down just on a message for the right or the left. And I think you see Kamala doing that right now
Yeah, I think so.
in the middle.
And I think that's why there's been an opening, in the polls at least, if you can count on those, which I don't know if we can or not, based on what I've seen the last few elections. But um, you're calling this, the age of instinct. And what do you mean by that? I mean, I think I know what you mean by that, but tell me what you mean by that.
Well, in the last few years, and I think particularly since the rise of AI, we have a much greater appreciation for how the human mind works. Now, we probably, in the scheme of things, over the course of the next 100 years, we're probably very much still in a primitive stage. But we know more than we knew before. And we do know that the brain is this associative, analogic machine that's constantly making associations and that's how it operates. And I think that that's going to affect every business. And I think that businesses that don't pay attention to behavioral science and how the mind works are really going to be left behind. And I don't mean just in B2C companies like, CPG, like we've been talking about, or retailers. I'm talking about B2B, B2C, B2B2C, pharmaceutical, healthcare. Um, Everybody needs to understand that this is how humans decide. And so I don't care if you're marketing to a, healthcare provider, a doctor, about what medicine he's going to prescribe to his patients, or trying to influence a social movement, or raise money for a philanthropic cause. Everybody needs to understand that this is how humans decide. Um, because that's going to empower them to create success much faster. The CMO of MasterCard, Raja Rajaminer, said in his acceptance speech at the AMA, the American Marketing Association, when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the American Marketing Hall of Fame, that there's only two things that marketers should pay attention to going forward, and that's behavioral science and AI. And I go a step, and I totally agree with that. But I take it a step further. I think it's not just about behavioral science, because behavioral science is just about studying human and animal behavior. I'm talking about applied behavioral science, actually being able to use behavioral science to change the course of your company's trajectory, to drive growth faster, to accelerate growth. in market share, in revenue, in profitability. And that's really exciting to know that you can actually be empowered to do that. And that's what the rules in my book help you do. They help you understand how to change business outcomes.
So cool. By the way, I saw a quote that he wrote about your book. I'm going to read it, and maybe it'll embarrass you, but it's really nice. A masterclass in understanding and leveraging the instinctive mind, the power of instinct dismantles traditional notions of consumer behavior and persuasion, uncovering the elusive formula for marketing success. That's a huge, huge recommendation. That's really cool.
He's a very nice guy.
Yeah, that's really nice.
I was very
Um, what would you like? Anything else for, how would you wrap this up? Anything else for our listeners before you get running? Thank you, by the way. It's been super, super interesting.
Oh, no, my pleasure. It's been fun. No, I would just say, listen, we've spent a lot of time as business people, as marketers, just as even as human beings, trying to persuade other people to do what we want them to do. And I'm just saying, stop doing that. It's exhausting, it's frustrating, and you're not going to get very far. And you know that from the last conversation you had with a relative about politics on Thanksgiving, which is
Sure.
again
Mhm.
very soon. I'm sure it's going to be the same kind of thing. You can't persuade anybody of anything. In fact, the opening line of my book is human beings are unpersuadable. What you can do is you can harness instinct. And instinct is the most powerful force for changing human behavior. And if you know how to leverage those levers of choice, you really have the power to change anything and everything in your life, in your business life, in your personal life. And yeah, you can really be empowered to make change and have much greater success.
Thank you so much. Pleasure getting to know you. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. Check out the book, The Power of Instinct, and you can get it on Amazon. I'm sure Barnes and Noble and all the other places where books are sold.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ken.